The wind moved through the prairie like it had secrets to tell, long whispers brushing the grass, curling around boot-scuffed earth and splintered pine. She stood at the edge of her cabin skeleton, one foot on a raw beam, hammer gripped in a calloused hand. One log, then another. A rhythm not unlike breathing. She didn't build fast. She built like someone who had nowhere else to be and nothing left to run from. Or maybe nothing left to chase. Her horse, a gray with more stubborn than grace, flicked its tail by the stump where she split kindling. No saddle on it. She hadn't ridden in weeks, hadn't left this little sliver of land since frost still sat on the morning brush. The high sun now burned the backs of her hands. She welcomed the sting, let it ground her. Every nail she drove into it echoed hollow against the valley. There were no neighbors. Not anymore. Just a hawk wheeling overhead, and the faint rustle of distant cottonwoods whispering of things buried beneath them. From the bluff beyond the creek, a rider watched. He sat quiet on his horse, still as bone. The wind tugged at his coat like it remembered him from a different time. His face was lean, weather-cut. The brim of his hat shadowed the lines around his mouth, the hollows under his eyes. He came this way once a week, always at dusk, always at a distance. She knew he was there, though she never turned to look. He'd started coming when the first smoke rose from her campfire 3 months back. Watched as she pitched a canvas lean-to, then tore it down 2 weeks later in favor of timber and grit. Watched her haul logs with a rope over her shoulder and a jaw set like granite. He wondered what made her stay, or if she was running so fast the land was the first thing to catch her. She didn't speak to herself, not like some loners do. No humming, no praying. Just worked with the silence, like it was an old friend who'd overstayed its welcome. One afternoon, the trap line she'd set by the creek caught something. A coyote maybe, or a stray dog. She didn't flinch at the snarl, just knelt, whispered something soft, then drove a knife through the animal's ribs clean and deep. But the next morning, when she checked the same snare, it had been reset. Perfectly. Her fingers hadn't touched it. She stared at it a long while, wind stirring the hairs at her neck. The third time it happened, she left a bullet on a rock beside the snare. Not a note, not a warning, a question. No one answered it. But the trap stayed empty after that. Days stretched into weeks. Her cabin rose slow, defiant. It had no windows yet, just gaps where wind blew through and mice scurried. Still, she swept the dirt floor each morning like it was sacred. Lit her fire each dusk like someone was coming home. One evening, the sky bruised with storm color. Her horse returned limping. Barbed wire twisted in its hind leg, blood mixing with mud. She swore low, tried to calm the beast, but it reared. She stumbled back, hand clutching her side. The sky cracked with lightning. That's when he came down from the bluff. No words, just dismounted, approached slow, like someone approaching a grave. The horse snorted, but didn't bolt. He untangled the wire, murmured soft things in a language older than English. Once the leg was freed, he bound it with a strip from his own shirt. She watched with a loaded rifle in her arms. When it was done, she lowered the barrel but didn't thank him. He nodded once and turned back for his horse. "You gonna tell me your name?" she asked, voice raw from smoke and disuse. "Only if you want to forget it," he said. She didn't stop him from riding off. That night, she sat by the fire with a letter in her lap. The edges were torn, the ink run. She ran her finger over one word, underlined twice, run. Folded it back into its envelope, and slid it beneath a loose board. The next morning, she found a stack of fresh-cut timber near her cabin. No footprints, just the weight of something left behind. She stared at it a long time before using the first log. Her hammer struck true. One log, then another. High above, the rider watched from the bluff again, the morning sun catching the silver in his hair. His hand rested on the saddle horn, steady. Like he wasn't just looking, like he was remembering, or maybe hoping. Down below, she raised another beam. Her fingers bled, but she didn't stop. Neither did he. The sun crept higher, blistering the sky with pale fire as summer settled over the land like a fever. The wind had grown lazy, leaving dust to cling thick to every surface. Her hands, once smooth from sewing and soap water, were now maps of cuts and calluses. Still she built. Still she stood. By now, the cabin had walls. Gaps sealed with mud, roof beams roughed out but not yet raised. She'd begun leaving a tin mug by the stump at the fence line, some days with water, others with leftover beans or a strip of jerky. He never came while she watched, but the mug was always empty by morning. One morning, it came back with coffee in it. Bitter, hot, and clean. She said nothing aloud about it. Just drank. Sometimes she heard the hammer of hooves in the hills, far off, but steady. He never approached again after the barbed wire, not fully. But she felt him near, like a storm rolling in just past the horizon, smelled before seen. She didn't know what he wanted. Didn't care, she told herself. But when she caught herself brushing ash from her shirt or smoothing her braid when she walked past the fence line, she knew that was a lie. He, too, wrestled with silence. The woman unsettled something in him. Not just want, he'd felt that before, a long time ago, back when his wife would sing to the horses and plant chamomile behind the barn. No, this was heavier. Like watching someone pull themselves out of a river you'd drowned in years ago. He started mending her broken fence posts. Just one at first, then another. The work was done so cleanly, so quietly, she couldn't even pretend it was anything but a gift. She left no thank you. Just replaced the tin mug with a jar of pickled onions and went on about her day. In town, they whispered when she walked past. She rode in once every 3 weeks. Took her time in the mercantile. Browsed nails and oilcloth and oats. Never lingered. Never spoke more than needed. But still, they whispered. One woman, older than the church steeple, crossed herself when she passed. Another spat at the dust behind her boots. The land she claimed wasn't empty, they said. It was cursed. A boy, skin the color of turned earth, hair straight as Winter Creek water, watched her from the blacksmith's corner. Half Apache, half something else, maybe even part shadow. He said nothing until she was about to mount her horse. They're coming, he muttered, not looking at her. The ones who think it's still theirs. She narrowed her eyes. This land was bought legal. He shook his head. Doesn't matter. Not to them. He gave her a pouch of bullets. Didn't charge her. Didn't say why. On the ride home, every tree seemed to lean a little closer. Every gust of wind whispered names she hadn't spoken since girlhood. She rode faster than she meant to. The prairie felt tighter, somehow. That night, he came closer than he ever had. She was splitting logs by lantern light, sweat clinging under her collar. He stepped into view. No horse in sight, just a shadow stretching long behind him. She didn't reach for the rifle, didn't speak, just handed him a cup of water. He drank slow. You ever build something from the ashes? She asked. He watched the steam from his breath rise between them. I tried. Didn't take. What happened? I was building on someone else's grave. Didn't know it at the time. My wife did. She left me for a while. I thought I could fix it. Then she died giving birth to a son who didn't breathe. She said nothing for a long while, just added another log to the fire. The land won't let you forget, she said. No, he agreed. It won't. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, real. Two people holding pieces of themselves they weren't sure could be shared. He reached into his coat and placed something at her feet. A bone button smoothed down and carved with a child's initials. It's all I got left, he said. She didn't touch it. Didn't need to. She understood. Pain didn't always want cradling. Sometimes it just needed to be seen. Later, he vanished back into the dark. She tucked the button under her pillow. Days passed. Nights burned colder. The trapped line stayed empty. The land, though restless, held its breath. Until the mark appeared. She found it carved into the outer post of her cabin, low, near the ground. A crooked circle split by a jagged line. Not fresh, not old. Burned into the grain like a brand. She scrubbed at it with a rag and lye, but it wouldn't come out. When he saw it, days later, he went quiet. You recognize it? She asked. Yeah, he said, jaw set. They called themselves riders of the third day. Clean-up men. Claimed deeds through ash and fire. They're still around? If you saw the mark, they are. Then why come back here? Her voice broke a little, rough like gravel. Why risk it? He didn't answer right away. Looked past her to the half-finished roof. Because this is the first place I've seen in years that looks like it was built for staying. She blinked against the sting in her eyes, turned away like it was the wind bothering her. He touched the edge of the beam with his thumb. I can help you raise the roof, he said. If you'll let me. She looked at him then, saw not just the man, but the tired soul behind his eyes. The grief that matched her own. You lay one wrong plank, she said, voice low, and I'll knock you off the ridge myself. He smiled, not with his mouth, but somewhere deeper. Fair deal. As he lifted the next beam, a hawk wheeled overhead, screaming something ancient to the earth below. They didn't speak again for hours. But the cabin rose higher than it had before. Stronger. Like something built not just with hands, but with history. The roof was up by the first frost. Smoke rose steady from the chimney now, sweet with pine sap and dry sage. Inside, the walls held warmth, not just a fire, but of something earned through ache. He'd brought stone from the river to line the hearth. She'd carved her father's mark into the beam above the door. Neither mentioned what it meant to the other, but both noticed when the wind no longer sounded like weeping through the gaps. She'd grown used to him, his quiet presence, the way he never crossed thresholds uninvited, the long silences where truths hung just beneath breath. They worked side by side most days now, chores done without chatter, meals eaten without ceremony. But their comfort ran deep, like water beneath dry earth. One morning, after a frost sharp enough to silver the fence posts, she found him sitting near the corral, staring at the horizon with a look like something old had stirred in him. She brought coffee without asking. They sent a scout last night, he said, fingers wrapped around the mug. How do you know? There was a fire up on Dead Mule Ridge. Same kind they used to light when they cleared land. His voice turned bitter, like the coffee he sipped. She didn't flinch. Just asked, cleared from who? His jaw worked. Then, slowly, the words came. When I was younger, I rode with a group of men. Veterans, mostly. We were hired to patrol these hills after the war. Keep settlers safe. Or that's what we were told. In truth, we burned out families, native, mixed blood, anyone without a deed written in white ink. I didn't kill anyone, but I didn't stop it either. Just rode ahead, warned folks to run. Some made it, others didn't. She stood still for a long time, her breath pale in the air. This land, she asked. He nodded once. Your land. I was here when your father's place burned. I saw the smoke. Saw your mother run with you bundled on her back. She screamed your father's name until the canyon echoed with it. The mug slipped from her hands. It didn't shatter, just rolled, spilling dark liquid over dry grass. She looked at him, then really looked. Not the man who'd built her chimney or brought her mended tools. The man who had watched everything she'd lost and turned his horse away. I came back to find peace, she said, voice hoarse. To lay him to rest on the land he carved with his bare hands. He nodded again. I know. And I didn't think I'd find you here. I didn't come to confess. I came to remember what I helped bury. She turned and walked into the cabin, closed the door behind her without slamming it. He didn't follow. That night, she dreamed of fire. Not memory, something present, alive, devouring the edges of her vision. She woke with the scent of smoke thick in her throat and ash floating in the rafters. The eastern wall was lit orange, flickering like hell's breath. She grabbed the rifle and flung open the door. Flames danced in the distance, barn, fences, a trail of fire snaking toward the cabin. Figures moved in the dark, shadows cut from gunmetal and oilskin. She didn't hesitate. Fired once into the air. A warning. The fire kept crawling. The shadows came closer. Then he appeared, riding hard from the ridge, shotgun strapped across his back. He slid off the saddle before the horse stopped moving and stepped between her and the flame. I didn't bring this, he said, breathless. But I'm here to finish it. They didn't speak again. Just moved. She handed him cartridges. He passed her the second rifle. The first figure crossed into range. She fired. He dropped. Another came behind him. Then another. Smoke swallowed the stars. The fire cracked the timber walls behind them. She aimed. Fired again. Missed. He covered her, moved like a man who knew exactly how fast death traveled and how little it cared for apologies. When the last shot rang out, it echoed into silence. The fire had eaten the barn and half the fence, but the cabin still stood, scorched but whole. She stood in the center of the yard, rifle hanging limp from one hand, hair matted with ash. He approached slow, not quite meeting her eyes. "Why'd you come back?" she asked. "I owed the land," he said. "But I owed you more." She studied him, the soot on his face, the blood blooming on his sleeve. "I wanted to bury you tonight," she said flatly. "When you told me what you'd done." He didn't move. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I couldn't do it while you were facing my fire." They stood there a while longer, the smoke rising behind them like a spirit finding its way out. The silence between them had changed. Not softer, but settled. He bent down, picked up the broken mug from earlier that morning, turned it over in his hands. "You want me gone now," he said. She shook her head. "I don't want anything. Not yet. But if you're staying, you rebuild what they burned." He nodded. Log by log. The stars blinked back into view, one at a time, as the fire died down. Neither of them looked away from the wreckage. Inside the cabin, the hearth still held coals. The stone hadn't cracked. The mark above the door still glowed faint in the firelight. Tomorrow, she would decide what to do with him. Tonight, they would keep watch together. Not as kin, not as lovers. Just two people who'd seen each other whole, faults, fire, and all. The snow came early that year, soft as silence. It drifted down through the pines like a benediction, covering the scorched earth, the charred remains of the barn, the blackened posts of the fence they hadn't yet mended. Under the ash and frost, the prairie held its breath again. They worked slower now, together but not side by side. Some days he would split logs while she sawed planks in the cabin's lean-to. Other days they said nothing from sunup to sundown. Yet in every motion, every lifted beam, a kind of conversation grew, one spoken in sweat and sawdust and the shared burden of rebuilding. She no longer asked him why he stayed. She no longer questioned the scars on his hands or the silence in his eyes. They had stopped naming things. Regret, debt, loneliness. Instead, they measured each day in what rose out of ruin. One morning, she found him mending the corral gate with cedar rails scavenged from the hills. His back stiff, shoulder still healing from the last raid, but steady. "You missed a knot in that beam," she said. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice." She leaned against a fence post, arms folded. The wind carried the sharp scent of pine and old smoke. "I notice everything. That's why I've lasted this long." He set the hammer down, wiped his brow. "I never asked, what were you doing before this?" "Before the cabin." She hesitated. "Living on borrowed time. Selling stitching work in towns where I couldn't sleep more than one night. Reading letters from ghosts. And now." She looked toward the cabin. The roof hole, smoke curling steady from the chimney, herbs drying from the eaves. "Now I'm trying to make something no one can take." A flicker of warmth crossed his face. Not a smile. Something quieter, like hope cracking through the old stone of his guilt. They didn't speak again until midday, when hoofbeats rose from the trail beyond the ridge. Not just one horse. Several. Rhythmic. Coordinated. The sound of purpose. She turned first, rifle already in her hands. He squinted into the snow-glared distance. "I know that rhythm." "How many?" she asked. 3. Maybe 4. They moved fast, cutting across the lower slope, a half circle to flank the cabin from the north. The same men, or what was left of them. The riders of the third day. One among them bore a black duster and a silver-buttoned rifle slung low, their leader. He dismounted halfway down the ridge, boots crunching frostbitten leaves. No rush, just certainty. "I'll do the talking," the cowboy said. "You had your chance to end this," she said coldly. "Now it's mine." He didn't argue, just followed. The man in the black duster removed his gloves slowly. "We didn't come for blood," he called out. "Just what's ours." She stepped forward. This land isn't yours." He tilted his head, bemused. "Deeds can be questioned. But names buried in blood, those don't lie." The cowboy stepped beside her. "And whose blood are you living on now, brother?" The man in the duster smiled. "The kind that doesn't forgive." He moved his hand. Fast. She was faster. The shot rang out before she knew she'd pulled the trigger. The sound cracked the valley, startled a flight of crows into the sky. The man staggered, fell to one knee, then dropped, snow blooming red beneath him. The others didn't fire, just stared, then turned their horses and disappeared into the trees without a word. Her hands shook as she lowered the rifle. Not from cold, not from fear, from the weight of what it cost to protect something. The cowboy knelt beside the man, checked for breath. Found none. He took something from the corpse's pocket. A deed. Old. Brittle. Faded with names and ink from another century. He burned it without ceremony. Later, as the fire crackled in the hearth, she sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, watching the paper curl into ash. "I thought killing him would feel like justice," she whispered. He sat across from her, nursing a gash on his forearm. "It's just survival. Sometimes that's all the justice we get." The cabin held the silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of breath and fire and something like beginning. In the days that followed, they finished the fencing, raised a new shed, replanted what hadn't frozen. No one came down the trail. No one dared. On a cloudless morning, the half-Apache boy from town arrived with a pack and a wild dog at his side. Said nothing, just walked to the edge of the cabin and stared. "You looking for someone?" she asked. He didn't answer, just set down the pack. The cowboy offered him bread. The boy took it. From that day forward, he stayed. Helped chop wood. Fetched water. Said very little, but watched everything. And slowly, the rhythm of the place shifted. 3 bowls at the table. 3 shadows by firelight. One night, she stood at the doorway, staring out at the prairie. The way the wind bent the grass. The way the stars blinked like old promises. He came to stand beside her, hands deep in his coat pockets. "You still think this cabin's cursed?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I think it's earned." He glanced toward the boy inside, curled asleep near the hearth. "You ever think we'd have this?" She let the silence stretch before answering. "No, but I knew I wanted it." He looked at her then, not just at her face, but through it, past it, to the woman beneath the scars and stubbornness. The woman who'd built her home one log at a time, not knowing who would help her fill it. He took off his hat, ran a hand through wind-tangled hair. "Do we name this thing?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "We just keep building it." He nodded. Behind them, the fire cracked. The boy stirred, but didn't wake. Snow whispered against the window panes, a sound like breath held in contentment. Outside, the prairie sighed, no longer mourning, but remembering. The cabin stood, full, warm, waiting.